Today, I'm going to talk to you about talking about your art. I get a lot of questions about that. And just recently, I got a comment on one of my social media posts from a young artist, Frankie. Shout out to you there, Frankie, if you're watching this. You're the reason I'm doing this video. And last week, I did a lot of talking about kind of overcoming your fear of failure and fear of public speaking was one of them. And so Frankie's got this show coming up. It's her very first show, and it's her first time ever having to speak in public since she did like a presentation back in school. So she's very nervous about this. So I thought that's perfect. This is a great topic to cover in this week's YouTube channel. Now, I just want to mention too, this year, I've really made the decision that I'm going to get into a really consistent rhythm. So I'm going to be trying to post a new YouTube video every week. And I'm going to be playing around a little bit with the kind of look and feel of it. So this one right here is being done with the green screen. Behind me, we've got our whole wall is kind of green screened and just having an image of one of my paintings. So let me know what you think of that. Do you like this look, or would you rather me be in my studio? Or another thing that I do sometimes is a PowerPoint presentation with my face kind of down in the bottom. So just let me know if you have a preference about which one you like best. So how do you talk about your work, right? We've all had that experience, especially when we're starting out, where you're standing there by your work and someone walks up and says, "Oh, can you tell me about this piece?" And you're just kind of in a panic. You don't know what to say. You don't want to sound like a pompous ass, but you don't want to say nothing. So in this video, I'm going to give you some really good strategies for talking about your art. So if you don't know me already, my name's Tim Packer. I've had a very successful 22-year career as an artist. It's given me a very good living, being able to go into my studio every day and do what I love. And I made the decision last year that really what I want to focus on for the next stage of my life, it's not doing more paintings and making more money. It's actually doing what I can to help change other people's lives. And in particular, those people who share the same dream that I had of becoming a successful artist. So if this is your first time with the channel, I really encourage you to look at more of my videos. And if you want me to keep making this kind of content, you can give me a thumbs up, but you can subscribe or not. Anyways, I'm still going to be here, and I'm going to try and put out a video every week. Sorry, I'm getting a little distracted. We've actually got a squirrel who's somehow gotten into the wall between our fireplace and the hearth. We've got people coming next week to get him out, but I can actually hear him up there scratching away. The other day we heard them mewling up there. We thought maybe there was baby kittens, but it turns out it's a squirrel who's coming in through our chimney. So if I look a little distracted, sometimes the scratching is really, really loud. Okay, so let's talk about why is it so important to be able to talk about your art? Well, if you can do that, it's going to do a few things for you. First of all, it's going to remove that anxiety. So you're not going to be going at a show and standing there being terrified that someone's going to ask you to talk about your work. You're actually going to get very excited about talking about your work. But even more importantly, if you can talk about your work well, and you follow these strategies that I'm about to give you, you will sell more of your work. So the one thing you don't want to do is actually talk about your work. There's no way you can talk about a specific painting the way you would talk about someone else's without sounding like a really pompous, what. And I actually I love telling stories to illustrate things. I've got a great story about this. So I've been doing social media for about 5 years, and almost all of it has been just me posting pictures of my paintings and pictures of my work in progress and some teaching and all that kind of thing. Well, I opened my own gallery several years ago. And even then, it was all just about kind of showing my work. Well, I decided I was going to have a show with a bunch of artists who were friends of mine whose work that I really liked. And so we did a group show. So I put that together. And then when I was promoting the show, I put out an image of a painting by an artist friend of mine, Wendy Birmingham. And she's an amazing, amazing painter. And someone commented on the painting, "Oh, I love this piece." And I responded back. I said, "Oh, I love it too. I think it's spectacular. I bet you it's not going to take long to sell at the show." And then like a few hours later, I got a response from this woman. She said, "Oh my God, I can't believe how arrogant you are. I'm going to unfollow you." And I was like, what is this woman talking about? I read my message over and over, and it's like, what could I possibly have said that was so offensive? And then I went, oh, she thinks that was my painting. And she thinks that's how I was talking about my painting. And not only was it just annoying, she was so disgusted with me talking about my work and the arrogance that she decided she was going to unfollow me. And so I responded back to her. I said, like, I'm not 100% sure why you're upset, but like, you do realize that's not my painting I'm talking about. That's the work of another artist. But it just shows you how important it is to be able to talk about your work and to not talk about your work by praising your work. So what do? Okay, I'm going to give you 5 strategies. So the acronym is SPICE, and it stands for story, process, importance, collaboration, and entwine, SPICE. So let me tell you what I mean. So the first one is story, and that's actually my favorite way to talk about a painting. And what you do is you don't talk about the actual painting. You talk about the story behind what caused you to be there, to get that image or to do that painting, something interesting about it that has nothing to do with the actual paint that's on there. And I'll give you a really good demonstration of that. So I was away on a painting trip up to Killarney several years ago, and I was hiking the Tarvat Trail. And at one point, there's this one area where you kind of go in amongst all these islands, and there's like this bay, and it's like beautiful Canadian landscape. It's water, rock, and pine trees. And I just realized, oh, tomorrow the sun is going to be rising right over that island. And if it's a great sunset, this is going to be a spectacular view. So the next morning, I got up at like dark 100 when it was still pitch black. You know, I packed up my car, got my camera, got on my little beanie light, the headlight that goes on your hat. I drove to the drop-off point of the trail, and I hiked about 20 minutes to get to this spot. And then I sat there and I waited for the sun to come up. Well, as luck would have it, it was an absolutely spectacular sunrise. And so for 20 minutes, I am just running around like a mad idiot, just taking pictures, like changing the angle as the sun's rising. I'm taking more and more pictures. I probably took about 100 pictures there. And from that one kind of 20-minute photo shoot, I've probably done about, I don't know, a dozen or 15 paintings, variations on that theme. And that's the story that I tell people when they ask about one of those pieces. And I can talk about it in a way I can get very excited about it, but I'm not talking about the actual painting. I'm talking about the story behind the painting. So the second strategy starts with P, it's process. You can actually talk about the process by which you created the painting and not get into that whole sounding like you're bragging or whatever. So I'll give you a good example of that. You may or may not know the way that I paint, and I'm going to explain it now. You may find it fascinating. So I often hear from people that, oh, I just love the way that you kind of capture the light and create the glow coming through the trees. And again, so like, what do you say about that? Well, I go into just explaining my process, and I say, oh yeah, like it took me a real long time to figure that out, but I actually paint in a way that's very unlike other artists. So I actually start on a red canvas, and then I paint the trees, the dark silhouettes of the trees, in fluid acrylic, usually in black if it's going to be a dark tree, in purple if it's going to be a birch tree. And then I paint, like if there's any distant hills or anything, I just kind of outline that in acrylic. And then I paint all of the foreground foliage. And then I go in and paint the sky last. And so I'm actually painting in all the sky holes right up until they meet the foliage. But I don't paint it like very, very persnickety so that it meets it exactly. So there's often a gap between the stroke that's the leaf and the stroke that's the sky. And in that gap, there's a little bit of red that pokes through. Well, that does two things. That actually kind of creates harmony in the painting, or unity in the painting, I should say, because there's that red sparkle that kind of occurs throughout the whole painting. But it also means that the outside of every leaf shape, or on the edge of every branch, there's like a little red halo. Well, it turns out that's actually what happens when we look at something that's backlit. It has like a warm halo, either a red, yellow, or orange kind of around the edge of it. And by painting in this way, it actually mimics the way that light actually happens. And that property is called diffraction. So I can tell people about this without talking about a particular painting. And they actually usually find it interesting, because I know people will, when their spouse comes over or whatever, they'll go, do you know that he paints on a red painting? This all starts red. And so again, I'm talking about the process, something that's interesting about it, that is going to engage people without me saying, oh yes, look at how I've captured the light here, and look at the movement through the painting, and how I've echoed little bits of red around here to maintain the unity, and all of this kind of blah, 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 blah stuff. So you get excited about the process, something about the way that you painted the painting. Okay, now before I get on to the next one, I also just want to stop for a second, tell you about some free training that I have. So one thing I should mention is all of this stuff, all of the stories, all of the having a collaboration, the process, how important it was. None of this stuff really matters if it isn't a good painting or a great painting. The first thing that has to be is a really strong painting. And you know that I believe that composition is one of the most important parts of any painting, the way in which the shapes, colors, values, edges, etc., are arranged. And I also think it is one of the weakest things for 95% of the artists that I see out there. And what really breaks my heart is when I see artists where they've made some really bad decisions in the first 3 or 4 minutes of the painting, whether it's how they divide the page, where they place objects, things like that. They've made some really crucial errors that the painting just can never rise above a failure. It's just, it's a fatal flaw that you can't get above without making major changes. And so what I've done is I've put together a PDF of what are some of the most common compositional errors that I see artists making. So this is not just hobbyists. This is other artists who are showing in galleries, artists who are showing in festivals, whatever. Just because someone's in a gallery doesn't mean that they're a great artist. There's a lot of bad paintings out there in galleries, and there's a lot of poorly composed paintings. And composition in art is just like composition in music, right? You can have a really beautiful song and just a bunch of kindergarten kids can sing it and it can sound beautiful. If you have a horrible song that's composed very, very poorly, even Michael Bublé or Adele can't make it good. So what I've done is I put together this PDF of the 10 most common compositional weaknesses that I see, and you can get that as a free download if you go to my website, www.timpackerartacademy.com. You scroll to the bottom and sign up for my newsletter. Just put in your name and your email list. You'll automatically get that PDF. You'll also get a chance to watch one of the modules in my color and composition course for free. And you'll get a whole sequence of emails where you can buy my color and composition course. I think it's for like $39 or something. It's regularly like, I think it's $89 or $79. So that's something that I would really recommend if you really don't know composition and you want to improve your work. And then for those of you who are dead serious about becoming artists and actually creating a career as a successful artist, I put together a free webinar. And in this webinar, I talk about how I went from a starving artist to a police officer to a starving artist, and then to actually living the life kind of beyond my dreams. I'll talk a little bit about Brooke Cormier. That's a young artist that I mentored for a couple of years, who has since been able to achieve in about 4 years what's taken me 21 years. I'll give you my 10 keys to selling your art. And here's a spoiler alert. The first 5 keys are not about selling your art. It's about the art, the creation of art, and the things you need to do to develop the skills and the conceptual knowledge to be able to consistently create great art. Anyways, you'll get all of those keys. And then there'll also be a brief explanation. I have a very in-depth course, kind of like a mastermind called Becoming a Successful Artist. You'll get an explanation about that with a really special offer that's going to end shortly. And the one thing that comes with that is membership in my Hungry Artist community. So that's a closed community of people who have taken this course. And we get together like once a month for Zoom calls, and I'll critique members' work. I'll offer coaching advice, and I'll just do Q&A. And that's kind of, those people have access to me. And so that's what you get with that course. So anyways, let's move on to the next strategy for talking about your work. So the second one is importance. And so that may be, a painting may be important to you in terms of your career development, or it might have been a breakthrough painting that where you kind of reached a new level or new subject matter or whatever, and you can talk about that. So one thing for me back, oh geez, almost, I guess it was 22 years ago, I was elected as a member to the Canadian Society of Painters of Watercolor. So the way that you had to do that, you had to get by a pre-jury first, and then you had to, if you got to the final level, you had to actually bring all of your paintings, 5 original paintings, down to the Arts and Letters Club in Toronto, and you drop them off, and the members of the society would actually vote to see whether or not you were going to be elected as a member. So I dropped them off in the morning. And that day too, my wife was west on business. So it was just me at home alone with my 2 boys who were like 5 and 7. And so I took them with me downtown Toronto. We dropped them off. We drove home, and then 5 o'clock in the evening, we drove back down, and I'm kind of waiting outside to get in and to hear the news. And so I come up and I give my name, and the woman, it was Jeanette LaBelle, who later became a very good friend of mine. She says, "Congratulations, you're a new member." And I was like, oh my God, like this was like a bucket list thing. Often people, work their whole life to get elected into this society. And I was just like so excited. But there I was with my 2 little boys. And so I come out and like, I'm all excited, and I tell the boys, I'm in, I got elected. And, so got home. It's like, okay, now I want to celebrate. I'm calling everybody that I know, but I just want someone to come over and like have a beer with me or have a glass of wine with me or something so that I could celebrate. But nope, nobody was available. So there it was, one of the most important days of my life. And I ended up sitting at home watching Thomas the Tank Engine with my 2 boys. And that's the story that I told about any of those paintings that were part of that juried process. So again, you can get really excited. You can talk about it and people get excited about that, but it's not doing it. It's almost like a humble brag kind of thing. Like you're talking about something that's very important, but you're not kind of going, oh yes, and then this painting got me elected into the Canadian Society of Painters in Watercolor. You're doing it in a very kind of conversational way. And ideally, I actually like putting a little bit of humor in the stories too, because everybody feels a little uncomfortable when they're talking about art, not only the artists, but the people there. So if you can kind of not take yourself too seriously and maybe even put a little humor into the story, I find that actually really, really helps. Now, the 4th thing is collaboration. And so this actually involves bringing other people into the process to talk about your work. Now, the typical example of this obviously is like if you're in a gallery, that's what the gallery owners or the gallery staff gets paid for, is to talk about your work, and then you don't have to do it at all. But I actually find that I sell much more of my work than the gallery people do. If I can talk about the work by either telling a story about it, talking about the process, or talking about how it was important, people are much more interested in that than in hearing some gallery person actually go on and praise the work and do the typical kind of gallery snobby kind of thing. But the collaboration thing that I found is really helpful is if you're at an art festival and you happen to have someone next to you who you know and trust, and also whose work that you like. And what you can do is you can actually sell each other's work in a very organic, not salesy way. And this happened to me several times in my career, where I had friends who were also out on the festival circuit and who were, about the same place in their careers that I was. And so we would often ask to be put beside each other. And what we would do, so Jeremy Brown is one fellow we did so many shows together. and Jeremy and I were number 1 and 2 at the McMichael show for a number of years running. So we'd get booths number 1 and 2 because we were the top 2 sellers the year before, and we'd be right beside each other. And what we would do is, if someone was looking at Jeremy's work and they said, "Oh, I really like this piece," and you can tell when someone's thinking about it, I would kind of sidle over and go, "Oh, that I love that piece too. That's amazing." Because you can talk about that kind of gushing type of response about someone else's work. You just can't do it about your own. And Jeremy would do the same thing for me. If somebody was interested in a piece of mine, he would just kind of casually go, "Oh yeah," like he'd just kind of move into the conversation and say, "I love that piece too. That's amazing." And it's like, yeah, like there's been a lot of interest in that piece. But again, not pushy, salesy, but just kind of reinforcing people's opinion that yes, that piece is a good piece. And they think, geez, if another artist next to him is really endorsing his work, then it must be pretty good. And the last one is E for entwine. And that means if you can actually combine the story, process, and importance, either 2, or sometimes you can get the triple whammy and get all 3 of them into the story, then that's going to be even more powerful and more likely to make someone want to buy the piece. And I still remember the very first time this happened to me. This was early in my career, and I had done a portrait of my son, Scott. And so I was having a studio open house. Now, at this time, I was actually taking on portrait commissions, but I was doing landscapes as well. And my landscapes were not very good. So, I might charge like $800 for a portrait. And for the same size landscape, I might charge like $200. And I used to have a big show in my house and all my friends and family. Initially, it was just friends and family. So there was this painting of my son, Scott. And it was a friend of mine that I'd gone to college with. It was his brother and his wife were there, and they were looking at this piece, and they just said, "Wow, like I really, really love this little portrait." And I just kind of went, "Oh yeah, there's like a huge story behind that," because I was not thinking that they were going to buy a portrait of my son. I had this here and other portraits of my kids just as samples to kind of drum up portrait business. And so they said, "Well, we'd love to hear the story." So I said, "Well, okay, this is right back when I started. I'd only been painting seriously for about 1.5 years after about probably a 8-year kind of almost 10-year hiatus after I left art college and joined the police force." So I said to them, "Okay, well, when I was starting out painting, I didn't really know what I wanted to paint. I just knew I wanted to get back to painting something. And everything that I read said, like paint what you love." And I thought, well, what do I love? I love my kids more than anything else. So it's like, okay, I'm going to start painting portraits of my kids. And really just for me, but that led then to more portraits and portrait commissions and all of that stuff. And so there's kind of sort of the story, part of the story about why I ended up doing this was painting portraits of my kid. And I said, well, this was like also like this was up at the cottage. And so I used to drive the boys nuts because I was always taking them out in the light and taking pictures of them. And that one day, Cameron actually was like a perfect little model, and he was kind of smiling for me and everything. And Scotty just did not want to be there. He was not happy. I took about 4 photos of him, and he looked like he was about to cry. So I said, okay, go down, you can get down and play by the lake. Well, this was back in the days of real film. And when I got the photos back, when I got them developed, there were all these real cutesy pictures of Cameron, but then there was this one photo of Scott where he just looked like so sad, and it was so haunting. And I thought, I have to paint this photo. Now, up until that time, I had been painting in watercolor. I had painted in oils before my kids were born, but when Cameron was born, he had really bad asthma. So I wasn't allowed to paint inside the house anymore with oils. If I wanted to paint in oils, I had to paint outside. So I'd been painting all my portraits in watercolor. And then I read this article in the Artist magazine about these new paints that were coming out by by Artisan, and they were water soluble, meaning that you could wash your brushes with soap and water and you didn't need turpentine. And I thought, oh, I want to try this. So I wrote away for the free sample, and it came in a little blister pack about this big, with just like a little, like the things you find throat lozenges in, with just a little square. And I still remember it was titanium white, Prussian blue, cadmium red, and cadmium yellow light. And so I thought, I'm going to try these oils when I paint this picture of Scott. And so I'd never used them before. I really didn't know what I was doing. I think I did a charcoal underdrawing, sprayed it with fixative, and then started working over it in oils. Anyways, when the painting turned out, I was like, oh my God, I love this painting. And at that same time too, I was doing a lot of research, and everything I'd read said that if you really want to get serious, take yourself serious, you should think about entering juried shows. So this was the first painting I ever entered into a juried show. And it actually blew my mind. It was accepted. Now, this was the Oshawa Art Association, and we had the amazing good fortune that we have the McLaughlin Public Gallery here in Oshawa, which is one of the top 10 public galleries in Canada. They give up a month every year for the local art guild to have our juried show. So it's like the very first painting that I ever entered into a juried show. It got to hang in one of the top public art galleries in Canada. And then it actually won the Best in Oils award, which was like absolutely amazing. And so then I was like, okay, I love these paints. I can't wait to start playing around with these more. Well, then I had to wait about probably almost 4 or 5 months until they were actually commercially available. Because like I say, I'd just gotten the free trial pack. And then once they came out, I really never looked back. And literally for the last 17 years, that's all I've used is the water soluble oils. Well, anyways, they were looking at me and they said, okay, how much is it? And I was like, what? They said, well, how much is it? We want to buy it. And I was like, oh, okay. I wasn't even intending to sell it. But anyways, I figured out, I said, well, what would I charge for a commission? So I said, it's $800. And they said, okay, fine, we're taking it. And that was the first time I really saw the power of that. So I told the story behind the whole kind of, why I was painting Scott, the fact that I thought it was going to be a lousy photo, but it turned out to be the one that really drew me. I told about the process, right, that I was painting in these paints that I'd never used before. And it was the first time I'd used them. And I talked about the importance of the piece, that it was a breakthrough piece for me. First of all, first piece in a juried show, first piece to win an award, first piece exhibited in a very good public museum. And it was a turning point in my career that led me into painting in water soluble oils. And if it wasn't for that story, that entire thing of the whole thing together, I have no doubt they probably wouldn't have bought it. But that's when it kind of twigged with me for the first time how important it is to be able to talk about the painting without talking about the painting. Okay, I have one more story for you that really demonstrates this too. And you can see when I'm talking about this, I get excited. And that's the other thing too. I will go out now, or before I really moved into the teaching and I was doing a lot of painting, I would actually plan several trips a year, knowing that these are going to give me stories that I can talk about the work that comes from that trip. Okay, so again, getting back to that show at the McMichael Canadian Collection, where Jeremy Brown and I used to help sell each other's work. I had a number of paintings that from a trip that I'd taken up north. Now, some of them were plein air pieces and some of them were studio pieces. And at one point during the show, a woman came by and she said, oh, I've narrowed it down. It's like it's between these two pieces of yours. And then there's like a couple other pieces by other artists. I'm not sure which one I'm going to take, but I'm going to take one of them. And she said, can you tell me about these pieces? And so in the first one, I just said, well, this is from a trip that I took up to Elora Gorge with a bunch of other artists. And I would hike and take photos. And this is one of the studio pieces that I did from that trip. And I said, but this one here, I said, this one I love, but not so much about because it's any better of a painting. But I said, so this trip that I was on with these other artists, we were actually living in a caboose in the Elora Gorge for a week. Now, any of you that know about the Elora Gorge, the only way to get there is by the Algoma Central Railway. And typically what happens is you come in, you get out, take pictures out of the train, and then you get back in the train and you leave. You can't stay there. Well, the only way you can is to rent the caboose that they drop in the valley, and you can stay there for a week. And this is also where the Group of Seven painted. If you've heard those stories about the Group of Seven living on a caboose and painting up in Algoma, this is where it was. So myself and 3 other artists, we rented this. So we were like following in the Group of Seven for like this entire week. And what would happen is every day, the train would arrive and like 500 tourists would get out and come into our valley, and we didn't want to be there when they were there. So when the train was coming in, it came in the same time every day, we would go outside the valley to paint. And so we'd take our canoes down near where Bridal Falls was, which is a very famous part of the Elora Gorge. We'd take the canoe down and we'd paint at Bridal Falls. And it was like really, really tricky because you've got your canvases, you've got your paint, you've got your easels, there's 2 of you in a canoe. You kind of get on the beach, the canoe, and get out without tipping it, find some flat ground so that you can actually set up your easel and paint. And then once you're finished with your painting, it's like, now you've got to get that wet painting back without smearing the paint. And then you still got to get the paintings home. And so what we did, we used an old trick that actually comes from the Group of Seven, and that is using twigs. And so what you do is you get little twigs, about 1/4 of an inch thick. You break them up into about that long, and you lay them down kitty corner on all the corners. And then you either have, if you have 2 wet paste paintings, you do them face to face. If you only have 1 wet one, you have to have another dry one the same size. And what you do is you put them down face to face. You've got the little twigs acting as spacers, and then you duct tape them together. And then when you get home, you take them off. And I said, you could go in and kind of touch them up, but I kind of like it. And I said, look, if I point right up here, you can see the little marks for the twigs. And the woman just said, I'm taking the twigs. She just loved the story. And it was like, that was it. That's what sold her. And I think the reason that's so important, again, about telling the story, telling about the process, telling about how it's important, is it's a really big decision for people when they buy a piece of art, particularly a piece of original art, especially if they're spending a fair bit of money. And they want to be able to say something about it. They want to be able to tell a story to their friends, the people that come into their home, whatever. And if you give them a good story, it's like, oh yeah, they're like, I want to be able to tell that story about that work. And I think you can tell that I actually got excited telling that story again because it's exciting. And if you plan various things about various excursions and things like that to go, even if you're just going to take photos, but then you can be excited when you're telling the story about where you went to take the photos or whatever. Okay, I hope you found this helpful. Oh, one more thing. If you are having a show, when you are having a show, so you have the idea now, you want to think about story, you want to think about process, you want to think about importance. Those are the 3 things you want to be able to talk about. But what you want to do before a show is you want to put all your work out, just line it up around the room on the floor, and you want to go around to each piece, and you want to look at that piece, and you want to think, okay, is this story, process, importance, or a combination of those? What am I going to talk about? And then you actually want to practice saying it out loud. Now you're going to feel like an idiot standing there in the room talking to yourself by yourself, but you'll very quickly realize how difficult it is if you haven't practiced it. But if you've practiced it, then when you're at the show and someone comes around to you and says, oh, can you tell me about this piece? Rather than going, oh, I don't know what to say. And well, this, you're going to go, oh, let me tell you about this piece. And you're going to go into that whole rant again. And again, you can see, I love talking about my work, but I don't talk about my work. I talk about the story, I talk about the process, or I talk about the importance of it. So let's just go over and recap. So the acronym is SPICE. So it's story, process, importance of the work. Now, one other thing you can do if you have another artist you're comfortable with is collaborate. And that means you're going to kind of help boost each other's sales and support each other and talk about each other's work. And then the last thing is entwine. If you can combine story, process, and importance and have more than just one of them, then it becomes even more effective. So you should no longer fear talking about your work. You shouldn't be nervous about talking about your work. And I guarantee you, if you embrace this and get good at this and get excited about it, you will sell more of your work. Because if people come up and ask you about a piece, they already have an interest in it. They're just waiting to be kind of pushed over the edge. If you can give them this kind of excitement and talk about this, that's what's going to sell the work. So don't forget, if you want to get my free PDF with the 10 most common compositional weaknesses, I'll put a link in the description, and that's the timpackerartacademy.com. And if you want to get my free webinar, that's actually at www.aspiringartist.ca. We've actually registered that website. That's all that is a landing page for you to go. You put in your email and your name, and there's like a new webinar starting every 15 minutes. And so for those of you who are really serious about pursuing a career in art, that's going to help you in terms of what you need to do to kind of advance in your career, sell your art, but it's also going to help you put together a plan about what are the things that you really should be focusing on now? What are the most important things that you can focus on now that's going to give you the biggest payoff down in the future? So I hope you like this. I will see you next time.